In the peaceful town of Grayford, where the river drifts lazily and neighbors greet each other with warm smiles, one fateful night shattered the calm. Mara Ellison, young Noah, and Ranger, the German shepherd who had been their steadfast companion for years, were suddenly swept into a storm of danger where cruel rumors and the grip of a powerful enemy tightened around them. Just as the darkness seemed ready to consume everything, Ranger's amber-coated figure and unwavering gaze cut through the chaos, fighting for every breath of his family. Yet as dawn broke over the rain-soaked docks, they still couldn't know what was quietly waiting ahead. Nestled in a quiet bend of the Alden River, the town of Grayford felt as though it had been gently wrapped in the thin blanket of time. Mornings here often began with the soft, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread drifting from the oak-and-crust bakery at the corner, mingling with the cool mist rising from the river as the first light of dawn brushed the water's surface. The dip and splash of oars from drifting fishing boats and the cheerful chatter of sparrows beneath shop eaves blended into the familiar overture of a new day. Down a narrow cobblestone lane near the riverfront stood Mara Ellison's two-story wooden house, its wide porch and white-painted railings a welcoming sight. Hanging baskets of bright red geraniums swayed lightly in the early breeze outside the second-floor windows. Mara had lived here since the days when Noah was still learning to walk. A beloved elementary school teacher, she was known for her warm smile and the way her storytelling could hold a room. Her life was simple, centered on her work, her son, and a very special companion, a German shepherd named Ranger. Ranger had been part of the family for over 7 years. His warm, amber coat, streaked with deep sable along his back, made him look like a noble sentinel standing proudly in the sunlight. His deep brown eyes had a way of locking onto someone as though seeing straight into their thoughts. Yet when he looked at Noah, they softened into something gentle, almost tender. Noah, now 12, was lean but sturdy from countless mornings spent running with Ranger across the grassy riverbanks. Every day before school they had their own small ritual. Noah would throw a worn leather ball, and Ranger would burst forward like an arrow, paws pounding the earth, then return with the ball secure between his jaws, tail wagging with pride. From the porch, Mara would sip her coffee and watch her 2 boys framed in the golden light of morning. In the afternoons when the final school bell rang, Noah never needed to search for his mother in the crowd. He simply looked for the golden back of Ranger glowing in the last rays of the day. The shepherd would be waiting at the gate, posture proud, gaze patient. And the moment he spotted Noah, his ears would perk, tails swinging in wide arcs, as if pulling the boy straight into his warm fur. Mara always let Ranger guide Noah home along the riverside path where willow branches draped their shadows across rippling water. Evenings in their wooden home felt like stepping into a small, glowing world. Mara would prepare a simple dinner, sometimes pumpkin soup with bread, sometimes a slow-cooked stew. Noah did his homework at the dining table while Ranger lay stretched out beneath his feet, head resting on the boy's toes. When Noah stumbled over a difficult problem, his hand would absent-mindedly find Ranger's head, seeking silent encouragement. The dog would answer with a slow blink and a tilt of his head, as if listening to every number and word. Weekends were for wandering the river trails together. Mara liked collecting smooth pebbles for keepsakes, while Noah raced Ranger through winding paths, their laughter and barking echoing under the open sky. One blustery afternoon, Noah threw a stick too far and watched it land near the river's edge. Without hesitation, Ranger splashed in, sending water flying, and emerged with the prize held high. Noah hugged him, both soaked but grinning, while Mara caught the moment in a photograph that would later sit proudly on her desk. Grayford seemed content to keep its unhurried rhythm. Neighbors greeting each other in the street, the bakery forever scented with butter, the freight boats arriving on time. But for Mara, it was the love she carried for her 2 companions, Noah and Ranger, that made this town home. She believed that as long as they were together, life would always be warm and steady. That evening, as the sun's light pulled away from the river, Mara stood on the porch with a steaming cup of tea. Noah sat on the grass, his back resting against Ranger, reading an adventure book aloud. The shepherd listened, ears twitching now and then, as if catching every word. In the distance, the low call of a train's horn mingled with the lap of water on the shore, closing another peaceful day in Grayford. Mara smiled softly, her gaze drifting over the river, glowing orange beneath the sunset. She didn't know that these tranquil evenings would soon become cherished memories, for an unseen current was already stirring at the southern docks. Soon Grayford's gentle rhythm would be pulled into a fierce tide, one where love, loyalty, and courage would face their greatest test. Later that night, after a cozy dinner, Noah was still eager to take Ranger for a short walk before bed. The late autumn air was crisp, the scent of dry leaves mingling with the damp breath of the alden. Mara wrapped herself in a wool cardigan, looped her old checkered scarf around her neck, and took up the leash, joining her son and Ranger as they followed the cobblestone path toward the river. Pale street lamps cast soft pools of gold beneath swaying willow branches. Now and then a stronger gust rippled the river's surface, scattering the light into shards like broken glass. The steady beat of their footsteps blended with the tap of Ranger's claws, creating a quiet rhythm in the still night. They crossed a small wooden bridge over a side stream, usually their turning point. But tonight Mara felt a sudden urge to walk farther. "Let's see the docks for a bit," she said lightly, making Noah nod with interest. In daylight, the southern docks bustled with arriving boats. At night, they were nearly deserted. When they were still some distance away, Mara noticed a flashlight beam sweeping across stacks of containers. A metallic clink followed, then the low, husky murmur of men's voices, too faint for a passerby to catch clearly. She raised her hand, signaling Noah to stop. Ranger froze instantly, ears pricked, eyes fixed toward the sound. The fur along his neck lifted slightly. His breathing was steady, his steps measured and deliberate. Mara tightened her grip on the leash, feeling the subtle pull from Ranger's stance. In the dim light, she made out two tall figures near the dock's edge, surrounded by large wooden crates. One man pried open a lid, revealing bundles wrapped tightly in oilcloth. The other pulled a thick envelope from his coat, exchanged it quickly, and tucked it away in a movement too practiced to be innocent. Noah held his breath, trying to remember every detail. The silver-gray coat one man wore, the flash of a broad silver ring when his fingers curled, and the mud-smeared license plate on a nearby truck, its last letters still visible. Ranger shifted his weight, those deep brown eyes locked on the scene. He tilted his head slightly, gauging the distance, then glanced at Noah with a steady look. Mara could feel the tension in every muscle beneath Ranger's warm amber coat. Yet he stayed close, ready, waiting. A sudden sound shattered the stillness. The heavy clang of a container door slamming shut, echoing through the quiet air. Mara flinched instinctively, tightening her grip on Noah's hand. The two men moved quickly, climbing into the cab of the waiting truck. The engine rumbled low before fading into the distance, leaving behind a cold emptiness and the faint, lingering scent of diesel in the wind. When the truck's noise dwindled to nothing but a thin echo, Mara exhaled, her heartbeat still racing. She gave a gentle tug on Noah's arm, guiding both him and Ranger away from their hiding spot. This time she took the long route that skirted far from the docks. Noah tilted his head up toward her, curiosity and worry mingling in his eyes. "Mom, who were they?" he whispered. Mara shook her head, her voice dropping low. "I'm not sure, but I think it's best you don't tell anyone about this. Not yet." Ranger kept glancing over his shoulder toward the docks, his tail held stiff. Though he matched Noah's pace, each step carried the sharp alertness of a sentinel, listening for messages only the night could send. Back home, Mara slipped off her coat and hung it by the door. Noah sat at the table, recounting every detail he could remember. The silver-gray coat, the wide silver ring, the partial license plate streaked with mud, Mara listened intently, absently running her fingers over Ranger's head in silent gratitude for his constant presence. That night, after Noah had drifted into sleep, Mara remained by the upstairs window, eyes fixed on the river, shimmering faintly under the moon. Somewhere out there in the town, something was quietly at work, and tonight had been just the first thin veil pulled aside. In the next room, Ranger lay close beside Noah's bed, ears twitching at distant noises, a silent guard in the shadows. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the glow of the street lamps. Yet the image of those shadowed figures by the dock stayed vivid in Mara's mind, and a reminder that Grayford's peace might be nothing more than a fragile shell. Somewhere in the dark, a long mournful train horn sounded like a warning for the days ahead, days that would test the courage of her whole family. 2 days after that night at the docks, the air in Grayford felt different in a way Mara couldn't quite explain. It began with stray whispers at the cafe on the corner, spreading outward like ripples over water. At first she caught only fragments while waiting in line for bread. Half sentences, hushed tones, and quick glances in her direction. She thought it a coincidence, until she walked Noah to school and noticed the change in certain parents' eyes. Some greeted her with tight, polite smiles, their voices stripped of warmth. Others turned away abruptly as if preoccupied. The once friendly glances now carried a thread of caution. The school wasn't much better. When Mara entered the staff room, the familiar scent of paper and coffee was there, but the quiet conversations stilled at her arrival. She smiled and greeted them as always, receiving only brief nods in return. Sally, a once close colleague, avoided her gaze, entirely muttering something about class before slipping out. It wasn't until she overheard 2 office staff speaking in low voices that the shape of the rumor took form. They spoke of a suspicious deal at the docks and of someone fitting her description spotted nearby. By the time the tale had been passed along enough times, it had twisted into something far more damaging. Mara was somehow connected to the trafficking of illegal goods. In a small town like Grayford, rumors needed no proof to take root. Just a few vague details and an eager imagination could grow them into full stories. At the market, Mara caught hushed voices as she passed the produce stall. At the bookstore, the longtime shopkeeper, once fond of chatting, gave her only a thin smile before busying himself with the shelves. Noah felt the shift too. At recess, a few classmates looked his way, then whispered to each other. That afternoon, he came home, set down his backpack, and asked Mom, "What are people saying about us?" Mara paused, then took his hand, her eyes soft but steady. "Believe in what you know about me. As for what they say, we'll answer it with what we do." Only one thing remained untouched by the creeping suspicion: Ranger's unwavering calm. Every time Mara returned home, he would bound toward her, tail-wagging eyes warm, as if the world outside didn't exist. In the evenings, when she sat deep in thought at the kitchen table, Ranger would settle at her feet, tilting his head, as though he understood every unspoken word. Yet Mara knew whispers wouldn't stop on their own. In a place like Grayford, a rumor could destroy a reputation in days. What troubled her most was the question of who had started it, and why. That afternoon, bringing Noah home from soccer practice, she ran into Mr. Peter, the elderly neighbor who had always spoken warmly to her. But today, instead of his usual smile, he greeted her curtly and hurried indoors. The curtain in his front window shifted as Mara and Noah walked past, as though someone was watching. It felt like the whole town was quietly turning its back, a heavy fog of mistrust closing in. Mara understood that if she did nothing, the lies could harden into truth in the minds of many. Deep down, she sensed an unseen hand at work, one somehow tied to that night at the docks. By the time darkness fell, the yellow glow from her home spilled a small circle of light onto the path outside. Mara stood on the porch, watching Noah and Ranger playing on the lawn. His laughter mingled with Ranger's excited barks, a bright sound cutting through the thickening air. In her chest, resolve was taking shape. Rumors would not define her life nor her son's future. If someone had chosen slander as a weapon, they would have to face the truth she intended to uncover. Far down the street, a silver-gray truck rolled slowly through the dark. Inside, the brief flare of a cigarette lit a face before vanishing, leaving only the faint scent of smoke trailing in the cold wind. The next morning began like any other. Autumn sunlight filtered through red maple leaves, scattering dappled light across the cobblestone path to Grayford Elementary. Mara walked beside Noah, carrying a stack of freshly graded papers, while he chatted about an afternoon soccer game. Ranger, his golden amber coat glowing in the light, padded close to them, ears pricking at the call of birds on the rooftops. That fragile peace shattered the moment they stepped into the schoolyard. 3 police cruisers lined the entrance, red and blue lights flashing against the classroom windows. A cluster of uniformed officers stood waiting, their expressions unreadable. Mara slowed her brow, tightening, a flicker of confusion passing through her eyes. Leading the group was Lieutenant Harris, a man in his early 40s, with eyes as cold as steel. He stepped forward, pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket, and spoke with clipped finality. "Mara Ellison, you are under arrest on suspicion of involvement in illegal smuggling." The words landed like a gavel strike in the open air, silencing the once lively schoolyard in an instant. The chatter of children evaporated, replaced only by the faint rustle of dry leaves underfoot. Noah stared, his heartbeat thudding in his ears, his mind too stunned to make sense of what was happening. "This is a mistake," Mara began, but a uniformed officer was already moving in, snapping the cuffs around her wrists. The metallic click rang sharp and cold. Ranger reacted instantly. He stepped forward, deep brown eyes locked on the officer restraining Mara. His ears stood tall, his whole frame tensed. Noah had to clutch the leash with both hands, holding him back while calling his name. The shepherd didn't growl. He simply stood as a living wall between Noah and the strangers closing in on his mother. Noah felt his own hands tremble, his fingers ice cold, despite the sunlight spilling over the schoolyard. Everything was happening too fast. His mother being pulled away, her eyes turning to find his, carrying both worry and a wordless reassurance. Students began whispering, their voices rippling outward. A few of Noah's classmates lingered nearby, their expressions caught between curiosity and unease. He wanted to shout, to tell them his mother was innocent, that this was a terrible mistake. But his throat closed tight. Mara was led toward the waiting police cars, her shadow stretching long over the concrete. Ranger lunged lightly to follow, but Noah held firm, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He couldn't stand watching her disappear. Yet the distance between them widened with every step. "Mom." The call tore from his chest, breaking across the schoolyard. Mara turned, managing only a small, steady smile before she was pushed into the back seat. The door slammed shut, the sound jolting Noah. Engines roared to life, blue and red lights pulsed again, and the convoy rolled away, leaving behind an empty space and a cold wind cutting through it. Noah stood frozen, his grip on Ranger's leash, the only anchor he had left. Ranger looked up at him, eyes speaking what words could not. They still had each other, and this was not the end. A teacher hurried over, resting a hand gently on Noah's shoulder, her voice kind, but edged with uncertainty. "Noah, you should go home for the day." He nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on the road, where the police cars had vanished. Kneeling, he wrapped his arms tightly around Ranger's neck, feeling the dog's warmth and steady heartbeat. In that embrace, fear and helplessness lingered. But so did a thin thread of hope, the belief that somehow he and Ranger would find the truth and bring his mother home. That afternoon, Grayford buzzed with fresh gossip. People spoke of the scene at the school, layering in details that made the story more sensational than it had been. But in the wooden house at the end of the street, Noah sat beside Ranger, eyes locked on the window. Every time a car passed, he stilled, listening for the impossible sound of his mother's return. Outside, sunset draped the town in gold that slowly deepened to orange-red. In the dimming light, Noah's and Ranger's silhouettes pressed against the living room wall. Two small figures unmoving, yet resolute, ready for whatever lay ahead. The next autumn morning, thin mist clung to the road leading to Grayford's courthouse. Noah sat silently on a long wooden bench in the hallway. Ranger by his side, their presence small against the high walls. His hands were laced together so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. Footsteps echoed on the tiled floor. Stray murmurs of those gathered for the hearing drifted over the smell of aged wood and paper. Every sound made his heart race faster. When the heavy doors opened, Noah and Ranger followed the crowd into the courtroom. Inside, pale gold light streamed through tall windows, casting long bars of brightness across the floor. The benches were full. At the front, the judge's dark wooden bench loomed like a wall between truth and accusation. Mara entered, her wrists free, but marked with deep red impressions from the cuffs. She wore a pale blue shirt, her hair neatly tied back, yet Noah could see the fatigue etched into her face. She tried to smile when her eyes met his, a fragile curve of her lips holding both worry and a flicker of trust. The hearing began in the judge's measured, solemn tone. The prosecution wasted no time presenting what they called evidence. Things Noah knew in his bones were false. A grainy video appeared on the projectors showing the blurred outline of a tall, slender woman near the docks on the night in question. They claimed it was Mara. Then came a crate seized from a warehouse at the edge of town. Inside were goods wrapped in tarpaulin and a fingerprint matching his mother's records. Noah knew it had been planted. The prosecutor stressed it as indisputable proof of her role in trafficking. Noah's chest burned, his hands clenched. Ranger lay beneath his legs, resting his head on Noah's knee, eyes fixed on Mara, as if he too could feel the weight of injustice in the room. Across the aisle, Victor Hale sat with one leg crossed over the other, his dark suit tailored sharp, his gaze cold as a winter lake. When he caught Noah staring, a faint mocking smirk tugged at his lips. Heat surged to Noah's face, but he held back. This was not the moment to act. Mara's lawyer rose, pointing out the flaws in the video, questioning the legality of the fingerprints collection. But each counterpoint was met with the prosecution's sharp, calculated responses, as though they had rehearsed every move to strip away her defense. Noah watched his mother take notes, her thin shoulders trembling slightly. Every time the prosecutor said her name, heads turned to stare. Some eyes filled with judgment, others with morbid curiosity. The courtroom lights seemed to press down like a weight, draining the air from his lungs. When the judge called a recess, Mara stood and sought Noah's gaze. In that brief glance, he saw exhaustion, but also the faint ember of a fire not yet extinguished. He moved to her side quickly, Ranger patting close tail, giving a gentle sway to break the tension. "Mom, I'll find a way," he whispered, his voice trembling but firm. Mara placed her hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently, as if to pass him all the trust and strength she had left. "Stay safe, Noah. The truth will come out." But Noah knew that waiting would not be enough. His mind replayed the night at the docks. The silver-gray truck, the man with the uneven gait, the yellow light spilling across a damp wall. These were pieces of a puzzle he was determined to complete. As the chime signaled the court's return to session, Noah's decision was already made. He would uncover the truth, no matter how far he had to go. Beside him, Ranger straightened his amber and sable coat, catching the light eyes bright as if he understood the mission that lay ahead. That afternoon, the court adjourned earlier than expected. The sky hung low and gray, heavy, with the promise of cold rain. Noah and Ranger stepped out of the courthouse, swept along in the quiet drift of people heading their separate ways. But inside Noah, everything churned. The false evidence, Victor's knowing smirk, his mother's tired eyes. He knew he needed a new angle, a crack in the wall that could turn the tide. As they cut through a narrow alley behind the courthouse, the sharp clink of metal carried on the wind, followed by a low, gravelly voice. "He wants the shipment out of the docks before Friday night." Another voice answered quick and tight. "But the woman from court, she's going to be a problem. You sure Victor can keep it quiet? Trust me. He's never let anyone get in his way and walk away unharmed." Noah froze, his heartbeat pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He pressed himself behind a rusted sign, leaning just far enough to see. At the corner of the alley, two men in thick jackets were talking. One was tall, thin, with a pronounced limp. Exactly the same silhouette Noah had seen at the docks that night. Ranger stood close at his leg head, lowered ears tipped forward. He inhaled sharply, and his eyes flickered with recognition. Noah felt the leash pull taut in his hand. Ranger had caught a familiar scent. "Easy. Wait," Noah whispered, glancing down. But Ranger's gaze didn't waver from the tall man. When the two turned to leave, the shepherd lowered his nose to the ground, following the damp footprints pressed into the cement. Noah took a deep breath, then made the choice. He would follow, keeping just far enough back to stay hidden. They trailed the men across several empty streets until they reached a cluster of abandoned warehouses on the town's edge. Shattered windows gaped like hollow eyes, rust gnawed at the steel frames, and the massive wooden door hung slightly ajar. From inside came the rattle of wheels and the thump of crates being shifted. Noah pressed himself against a cracked brick wall, listening. The limping man's voice carried out. "Tomorrow night, everything leaves. Nothing stays." Another voice cut in. "And about the teacher, Victor's already got it handled. By the time court wraps, every real piece of evidence will be gone." Each word sank into Noah like a blade. He didn't need to ask. They were talking about his mother. He turned to Ranger, eyes set with more determination than he'd ever felt. The shepherd edged forward, nose still aimed toward the darkness inside. A sudden noise from behind made Noah flinch. A gray cat leapt down from the corrugated roof, knocking loose a few tiles. Inside, footsteps stopped. "Someone out there," the limping man's voice barked. Noah yanked Ranger into a side passage, his pulse hammering. Moments later, the warehouse door creaked open and a flashlight beam swept the yard. He pressed his back to the wall, holding the leash tight. Ranger stood perfectly still, but his eyes stayed locked on that swaying light. When the beam turned inward again and the door slammed shut, Noah finally exhaled. They'd gotten away, barely, but he'd found something priceless, a trail to follow. On the walk back, his mind raced through how to get this to his mother's lawyer. Ranger trotted beside him, tail flicking lightly, as if he too understood the value of what they'd uncovered. That scent, the mix of engine oil and harsh cigarette smoke, would lead them further. By the time the town's lamps flickered on, Noah glanced over his shoulder toward the warehouse, feeling as though the shadows there were still watching. But instead of fear, a single thought anchored itself in him. Follow this trail until the truth came out. The next morning, gray clouds clung to the sky over Grayford, and a chill wind funneled down the stone-paved streets. Noah gripped the strap of the old canvas satchel slung across his chest, feeling the weight of what was inside. Beside him, Ranger's stride was steady, his amber and sable coat catching the pale light, ears forward, eyes sharp with purpose. Noah had stayed up all night sorting through his thoughts, and decided there was only one way to save his mother: get this evidence into the courtroom itself. There was no time to schedule a meeting with the lawyer. He feared it would be intercepted or erased. When the courthouse came into view, he pulled his hood up and slipped past the clusters of people in the front square. He chose the side entrance for staff, where fewer eyes lingered. Ranger patted close his paws, silent on the stone floor. The heavy wooden door gave way to a corridor bathed in muted gold from the tall windows. Footsteps, the rustle of papers and low voices echoed faintly. Noah kept his breathing even as he approached the great double doors to the courtroom. Inside, the trial was already underway. Mara sat at the defense table, her face calm, but her eyes tired. At the prosecution's table, an attorney gestured toward photographs and reports spread before the judge, speaking in an even, practiced tone. The gallery was silent, except for the tap of a pen. Noah stood at the threshold, the rest of the sound falling away until only his heartbeat remained. Ranger looked up at him as if to ask. Now Noah nodded. The latch clicked as he pushed the door open. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the room at the sight of a boy and his dog stepping forward. Noah's shoulders squared. His grip tightened on the satchel strap. A shaft of light from the windows seemed to halo them both. He walked past the rows of benches, eyes fixed on his mother's table. Ranger matched him step for step, his nails clicking softly on the polished floor. When they reached the front, Noah pulled the bag off his shoulder, unzipped it, and placed the items on the table one by one. A rusted key, a warehouse access card, and a photograph showing a man trading goods with Victor Hale. This will prove my mom's innocent. His voice rang out steadier than he expected. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Mara's lawyer shot to his feet, taking the bag with a flicker of surprise and respect in his eyes. Ranger stood firm at Noah's side, gaze locked on Victor, who sat in the public rows. Victor froze mid-smirk. The curve of amusement vanished, replaced by a narrow-eyed stare that bored into Noah, a silent warning wrapped in menace. The judge's gavel struck twice. Order. This court will recess to review the new evidence. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Some whispered about the boy's courage, others exchanged curious glances. Mara turned to her son, her lips trembling in a mix of pride and worry, her eyes bright. Noah backed away slowly, Ranger moving with him toward the last row. He knew this was only the first step. They had placed weight on the scales, but the balance of justice still needed more to tip toward the truth. Beyond the high windows, the clouds were breaking. A narrow beam of sunlight spilled directly over where Noah and Ranger stood. And in that light, he felt the certainty that the fight had just reached a turning point. The courtroom held its breath as the judge called for a recess to examine the new evidence. Mara's attorney, Mr. Henderson, swiftly gathered the items from Noah's hands and laid them on the polished oak table beneath the muted yellow glow of the overhead lights. He began his presentation, voice steady but firm. Your Honor, this key matches the lock at the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Grayford, an area currently sealed under investigation. Fingerprints confirm it was used recently. This access card bearing the Hale Logistics Company logo is issued only to senior management. And this photograph, Henderson lifted the image for all to see, shows Victor Hale engaged in an illegal exchange of goods with a known human trafficker. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Several in the gallery turned toward Victor, suspicion and unease etched on their faces. Victor remained outwardly composed, but his fingers tapped a slow rhythm against the armrest, his eyes darkening. The judge leaned forward, gaze sharp as steel. Mr. Henderson, are you asserting that these items directly connect to the case? Your Honor, there is every reason to believe so. These open an entirely new line of inquiry and could demonstrate that Mara Ellison is not involved in the alleged crimes. After a brief exchange with the clerk, the judge delivered his ruling. The defendant, Mara Ellison, will be released pending further investigation. Due to the case's complexity, she will remain under supervision and may not leave town. The gavel struck. Mara turned to Noah and Ranger. her eyes shimmering, now lit with a fragile but unmistakable hope. Noah ran forward, wrapping his arms tightly around his mother. Ranger stood beside them, tail wagging gently, his amber coat glowing where a shaft of sunlight slipped through the high windows. Outside the courthouse, Henderson moved in close, lowering his voice. "What you two did today was remarkable. But from here on, it gets more dangerous. Victor won't sit still while his world unravels." Mara's grip on Noah's hand tightened. "We've started this, and we're going to see it through." On the stone steps, a cold wind whirled dry leaves into spirals. Far across the street, a black car sat motionless, its windows dark, engine off, but parked squarely facing the courthouse doors. Noah thought he saw movement inside, but when he blinked, it was swallowed by shadow. "Don't stare," Henderson cautioned. "We leave now before we become the next targets." Ranger glanced back toward the car until it turned off onto another street. On the walk home, Mara clutched her bag to her chest, the copies of the evidence inside. Every step felt heavier, with the weight of both responsibility and risk. Yet in her chest burned a flame of truth and of the will to win justice. Noah stayed close at her side, one hand resting on Ranger's back. He knew what they'd done had made Victor wary, but it had also painted them as a threat he couldn't ignore. At the corner near their home, a white slip of paper wedged under the windshield wiper caught Noah's eye. He pulled it free and unfolded it. The scrawled words were brief. "Turn back before it's too late." Mara glanced at her son, then at Ranger. The shepherd's body tensed, ears pricking high, his locked on the far end of the empty street. The wooden gate to their riverside home creaked open, and the glow of sunset spread across the stone path leading to the porch. Mara stepped into the yard, her shoulders still burdened, but her eyes now carrying a warmer light than they had that morning. Noah paused in the doorway, needing one more heartbeat to believe she was truly there. Then he sprinted forward into her arms. Mara held him close, feeling the wiry frame and the warmth of his body, as if trying to make up for every day of fear and separation. You've... Her voice broke, unable to finish. Ranger moved in with a quick, sure stride, stopping before Mara and lifting his deep brown eyes to hers, silently asking if all was well. Mara knelt, wrapping her arms around him and pressing her face into the thick amber fur. The scent of sun and earth that clung to his coat made her chest tighten. "Thank you. Thank you for saving me, my friend," she whispered, her hand stroking down the length of his back. Ranger's tail gave a slow sweep, his ears dipping slightly as he accepted the affection with gentle, steadfast eyes. From a few paces away, Henderson watched with a rare smile. He knew this was more than a reunion. It was proof that love and loyalty could survive fear and danger alike. They settled onto the porch steps, where the river breeze brought a cool freshness from behind the house. Noah leaned against his mother's shoulder, his hand still resting at Ranger's neck. The last light of day gilded each hair of the shepherd's coat, making it glow as if it carried its own warmth. Mara spoke softly about what had happened in court, her voice breaking here and there while Noah filled in the gaps with his own story of how he'd found the evidence. Their words were interwoven with quiet sighs, small laughter and glances heavy with understanding. Ranger lay beside them, lifting his head now and then to scan the street, still on alert. The homecoming was real, but he seemed to know the danger wasn't gone. For now, though, his mission was to hold this fragile circle of peace together for as long as the evening would allow. Mara brushed a stray lock of hair from Noah's forehead. "You've done something I'll remember all my life, Noah. I'm prouder of you than of anything else." Noah's smile was modest, almost shy. "I just did what I knew was right, and I had Ranger with me." Those words made Mara turn again to the shepherd, her hand finding that familiar warmth in his fur. Her eyes shone as she realized that in the middle of accusations, betrayal, and gathering darkness, The pure love of her son and Ranger's unwavering loyalty were the lanterns guiding her through. As night settled over the town, the three remained together on the porch steps, their silhouettes joined into one unbreakable shape. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle carried on the wind, sending a faint tremor through the air. Mara lifted her head, her heart filled with both peace and resolve, because she knew the fight for the truth was far from over. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, striping the polished floorboards. Mara was in the kitchen making coffee when a knock came at the door, measured heavy, as if each strike was meant to carve an unspoken message into the air. Ranger rose instantly from the rug near the entrance ears, standing tall, deep brown eyes locked on the sound. In the morning light, his amber coat shimmered as though charged with static. Noah had just stepped off the stairs when he saw the shepherd planted squarely before the door, every muscle drawn tight like a wire. Mara opened the door, but no one stood there. Only an old brown envelope set neatly on the porch step. She bent down, lifting it with care. Ranger padded forward, nostrils flaring, as he sniffed quickly around the envelope. Then, with a sudden sharp hiss in his throat, his tail dropped and his eyes hardened, locking on the far end of the empty street. "What is it?" Noah asked, his voice edged with concern. Mara didn't answer right away. She closed the door gently, carrying the envelope into the kitchen. Under the light, the paper's surface revealed faint scratches, as though it had been kept too long in a coat pocket or rubbed against something sharp. With a letter opener, she sliced along the edge. Inside was a map folded into quarters, its paper yellowed with age. When she spread it open, Noah instantly recognized the layout. It was the outskirts of town, the same area where the abandoned warehouse sealed years ago in old criminal cases still stood. A deep crimson circle marked the very center of the warehouse complex. Alongside the map was a smaller scrap of paper bearing only 4 words scrawled in black ink. "The game begins now." No one spoke for several seconds. The ticking of the wall clock grew unnaturally loud, as if time itself had tightened with them. Mara set the paper on the table, her gaze far away. "Is this a warning or an invitation?" Noah swallowed. "Or a trap?" Ranger stepped up again, nose dipping toward the envelope. He sniffed more deliberately this time, then let out a low growl from deep in his chest, the ridge of fur along his spine standing. This wasn't his usual reaction. Mara realized there was something in the scent that agitated him, something that made him far more alert. When Henderson arrived, he examined the envelope and map closely. His brow furrowed. "The sender wants you there. Whether to find something or to lure you into danger, they know you'll understand the message. And if this ties back to Victor, we prepare for the worst." Mara folded the map without a word, though her hand trembled slightly. Part of her burned to uncover whatever truth the warehouse might hold. Another part feared for Noah's and Ranger's safety. But the way her son looked at her now, steady older than his years, told her they had entered this fight together, and there was no turning back. That afternoon, when Mara and Noah stepped into the yard, Ranger lingered near the door, eyes fixed down the street, ears pricked high. Every unusual sound, every passing shadow drew his attention. He seemed to know that the envelope carried not only information, but the scent of danger. Overhead gray clouds began to gather, promising rain. Mara looked toward the warehouse marked on the map, the weight in her chest matched by a heat. An unshakable sense that buried secrets that were waiting to erupt. The next morning, a thin veil of fog muted the riverside town to a pale, milky blur. Mara, Noah, and Ranger set out early. Their car rolled away from the familiar street toward the outskirts. The map from the envelope rested in Mara's coat pocket, each brush of her hand against it, a reminder of the crimson circle waiting ahead. The highway cut through damp fields, still heavy from the night's rain. The hum of the engine blended with the soft hiss of wind through a cracked window. In the back seat, Noah kept a hand on Ranger's back. The shepherd lay pressed against him, head turned toward the window, eyes tracking every movement outside. About 10 minutes from town, Mara caught sight of a dark gray truck in the rearview mirror. At first, she thought it a coincidence. But when she turned onto a quieter road, the truck followed, keeping just enough distance to avoid drawing attention, yet never leaving her mirror. Her lips pressed thin, her grip on the wheel tightened. A quiet tension settled into her breathing. "Mom, why is that truck still behind us?" Noah's voice was soft, but the worry was plain. "Sit still and keep Ranger close." As if he understood, Ranger's ears shot up, the muscles along his back rising in tight ridges. His eyes stayed locked on the truck's reflection in the side mirror, occasionally flicking to Noah as if to make sure the boy was all right. Up ahead, the road forked. One branch continued toward the main highway. The other curved into a dirt trail through a sparse forest. Mara made her choice in a heartbeat, steering onto the trail. Gravel crunched under the tires, the shadows of trees folding in to swallow the daylight. The truck followed this time, closing the gap. From the mirror, Mara could see more. No license plate, windshield clouded with dust, and the driver hidden behind glare. Noah's grip tightened on Ranger's leash. The shepherd shifted closer, lowering himself slightly, body angled toward the door, ready to spring. His amber gaze didn't leave the truck, as if reading each possible move before it came. The deeper they went, the rougher the road became. Potholes and exposed roots forced Mara to slow, but her hand stayed steady on the wheel. She weighed every option. Turning back was impossible, stopping was too risky. The only chance was to find a side path or a place with people. Suddenly, the truck's engine roared, closing in fast. Ranger rose to his feet, claws clicking on the floorboard, a deep, steady growl vibrating from his chest. Noah wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, part to hold him, part to draw calm from those steady amber eyes. Then Mara spotted it, a narrow turnoff leading to an open patch of ground beside a stream. She swung the wheel sharply, the car tilting but holding steady. Light broke through the canopy, scattering over the water's surface. The truck didn't follow in. It stopped at the mouth of the trail, paused for a long moment, then slowly backed away, vanishing into the trees as if it had never been there. Mara exhaled hard, her hands still clamped to the wheel. Noah's shoulders eased, though his eyes stayed fixed on the place where the truck had disappeared. Ranger sat breathing evenly, but his gaze remained sharp. "I think they'll be back," Noah said quietly. Mara met his eyes in the mirror, her tone firm but warm. "Maybe, but we'll be ready." The stream's cool breeze swept through, but in all three of them, a fire of vigilance had already been lit. And Ranger, as always, stood as the living shield between them and the darkness pressing closer. The clearing by the stream led to a narrow trail, nearly swallowed by wild brush. Mara steered onto it, the car rocking over stones and roots. Minutes later, in a thinning of the forest, an old wooden cabin emerged. Its walls silvered by years of weather, its roof sagging but still enough to keep out wind and night chill. "We'll stay here for now," Mara said, stopping the car beside the porch. Noah stepped out, inhaling the damp scent of earth and fallen leaves carried on the river wind. Ranger leapt down beside him, deep brown eyes sweeping the clearing as if mapping every corner of safety in his mind. Inside the cabin, a thin layer of dust coated the long-abandoned furnishings, a rickety wooden table with uneven legs, a few chairs with broken backs, and in the corner, a small fireplace. Mara gathered dry wood from around the cabin and coaxed a fire to life. The golden glow cast warm light across their faces, easing some of the tension left by the pursuit earlier. Noah sat pressed against Ranger, running his hand down the shepherd's back as he murmured, "You'll keep watch for us tonight, won't you?" Ranger tilted his head, ears standing tall as though the answer had been obvious all along. Dinner was simple, just dry bread and some fruit they had brought. After eating, Mara told Noah to lie down on a blanket near the fireplace, while she sat with her back to the wall, eyes fixed on the small window overlooking the river. Ranger lay stretched out near the door, nose pointed outside, his breathing slow and steady, but never losing its edge of vigilance. Night fell. The steady trickle of the river mixed with the hum of insects into a rhythmic backdrop. Mara gradually allowed herself to relax, but Ranger did not. His ears flicked now and then, reacting to each faint sound in the darkness. Around midnight, a different rustle of leaves reached them from afar. In an instant, Ranger was on his feet, slipping silently toward the door. Mara rose too, signaling Noah to stay quiet. Moonlight filtered through the window slats, just enough to reveal a figure slipping between the trees outside. The wooden door quivered. Someone was testing the handle. Mara gripped a long piece of firewood, but Ranger moved first. He lunged, a deep, certain growl rumbling from his chest, paws planted firmly as he blocked the doorway. The shadow outside paused, but a heartbeat later the intruder tried forcing the door. Ranger threw his full weight forward, teeth bared, eyes blazing. A powerful shove made the figure stagger back a few steps. In the scuffle, a sharp metallic scrape rang out, the flash of a blade catching the light through the crack. Ranger surged forward, slamming the door open and clamping his jaws around the stranger's arm. A cry of pain tore through the night, and the dark figure fled into the trees. Ranger held his place at the threshold, panting, but still focused on the direction the intruder had gone. Mara hurried to his side, laying a hand on his back and feeling the faint tremor there. Through the ruffled amber fur on his shoulder, she saw a small tear in the skin beading with blood. Oh, God. Noah dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he reached for the wound. "It's just a scratch, nothing deep," Mara assured, pressing a clean cloth over it to calm both her son and the dog. "Ranger's fine." Ranger licked Noah's hand as if to sweep away the worry in the boy's eyes. Still, what had just happened was enough to tell all three of them that danger had reached even this hiding place. Mara barred the door, wedging chairs and planks against it. The cabin fell back into the flickering shadows of the firelight, but they all knew sleep would be harder to find now. Outside, the river wind hissed through the treetops, carrying with it the fading footsteps of whoever had fled, and a lingering scent in the air that kept Rangers stationed at the door, brown eyes wide and ready for any sign of movement. By morning, sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, striping the worn floorboards with soft gold. Mara was dousing the last embers in the fireplace when Ranger's ears snapped upright, his head turning toward the forest's edge. Noah, mid-motion while pouring water for the dog, froze and followed his companion's gaze. From the river path, a lone figure appeared, walking slowly but not furtively. Tall and lean, dressed in a faded brown coat, boots caked with damp earth. A worn backpack hung from his shoulder, and in his hands was a neatly bound bundle of cloth. Ranger moved forward, positioning himself between Mara and Noah, his eyes never leaving the stranger. The man stopped a few paces away, raising both empty hands in a sign of peace. His voice was rough but clear. "My name is Elias. I used to work for Victor, but I want out." Mara kept her distance, her gaze cautious. "Why have you come here?" "To warn you, and to make amends." Elias lowered himself onto a nearby rock, untying the bundle and setting it down before them. Inside were several papers, a black USB drive, and a few photographs. He spoke slowly, each word heavy with memory. "Victor doesn't just smuggle goods. He runs a route for moving classified documents and sometimes weapons along this river. I handled communications and inspections. The night at the docks, you may have seen part of one of those transactions." Noah tightened his grip on Ranger's leash, his mind flashing back to the dog's tense, watchful eyes that night. Elias went on, "I know he's framing you, Mara, to cover his tracks. I kept some evidence, Things that, if revealed at the right time, could dismantle his whole network. Mara's eyes fell on the photographs, the docks under night sky crates being loaded onto a wooden boat, and one clear shot of Victor shaking hands with a man in a gray suit. "Why help us?" she asked, her voice still measured. Elias dropped his gaze, hands clasping tightly. "I lost a brother in an operation Victor orchestrated. I won't see anyone else end the same way. Last night, I was nearby. I saw someone try to break into your cabin. If Ranger hadn't reacted..." He let the rest hang. Noah glanced at Ranger, running a hand over the shepherd's warm amber coat, gratitude swelling in his chest. Elias extended the USB toward Mara. "This holds transport schedules and a list of everyone involved. But be careful. Victor's eyes are everywhere." Mara took it, locking eyes with her son in a silent promise that they would not waste this chance. Elias rose slowly. "I'll take you somewhere safer. It's near town, but hidden enough he won't find you. From there, we can plan how to use the evidence." Ranger stepped forward, sniffed lightly at Elias's coat, then looked back at Mara with an expression that seemed to say he accepted this man, at least for now. Mara nodded. "If you truly want to help, this is the start. But I warn you, once you stand with us, Victor will see you as a traitor." "I accepted that long ago," Elias replied, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. The three of them and the dog gathered their belongings. The sun was climbing higher, glinting off the rippling river, but each of them knew the shadows were still out there. Now, though, they had a new ally, one who held the key to unlocking long-buried secrets. That morning, a thin veil of mist still drifted over the water as Elias led Mara to a hidden trail that wound back toward town. It curled through low-lying ground beneath towering old trees, sheltered enough to avoid prying eyes. "We'll circle back," Elias said firmly. "If Victor still has watchers, he'll think you've vanished for good." Noah sat in the back seat, his hand resting gently on Ranger's back. The amber-coated German shepherd leaned his nose toward the narrow gap in the window, inhaling the rushing wind in deep, steady breaths. Suddenly, his ears pricked, his gaze sharpening toward the road ahead. Mara noticed the change instantly. Rangers picked up something she said, easing her foot off the gas. As they reached the outskirts of town, the dog began to tug lightly at the leash, insisting to walk. Elias nodded. "Let him lead. He'll take us to what we're looking for." The trail brought them to an abandoned industrial lot, its rusted iron fence sagging under the weight of overgrown weeds. In the center stood a large warehouse, weather-stained brick walls, and a chained metal door, the air thick with the smell of damp rust. Ranger moved without hesitation, circling the perimeter, nose low scanning every shadow. He stopped abruptly at the side of the building, where a half-broken board covered a small door. With a firm nudge, Ranger pushed it open just enough for Elias to slip inside and unlatch it from within. The hinges groaned as the door swung wide, revealing darkness, heavy with dust and the scent of rotting wood. Flashlights cut through the gloom, sweeping across stained concrete stacks of empty crates and deep shadows. In one corner, Noah's voice broke the silence. "Over here." He pointed to a pile of old blankets, discarded plastic cups, and strange scratches carved into the wall. Mara crouched, her heart tightening as she traced the marks. A jumble of initials and cryptic symbols. Elias stepped closer, voice low. "This is where they held people. These markings. They might be victims leaving their names or signs for whoever came next." Ranger pressed deeper into the shadows, stopping at a stack of abandoned crates. He pawed furiously until something small rolled free. A worn leather bracelet engraved with 2 faded letters. Mara picked it up, her hand trembling. "This belonged to a girl who went missing last year. I saw it on the flyers." The air grew heavier. Elias's gaze swept the space. "We need to document everything. This is living evidence." Noah began snapping photos while Mara carefully collected anything that could be traced. Ranger kept working, stopping before a section of wall and giving a sharp bark. Elias pressed his ear against it, hearing a hollow echo. Together they pried loose a patch of brick, revealing a hidden cavity stuffed with thick envelopes and a weathered notebook. Mara flipped it open. A list of dates, names, and symbols matching those carved into the walls. Elias exhaled slowly. This is a log. Victor's been using this place far longer than we thought. Light streamed faintly through the cracked doorway, dust motes swirling like fragments of forgotten memories. Noah tightened his arms around Ranger's neck, determination blazing in his eyes. "Mom, we can use this to end it. All of it." Mara met his gaze, then Elias's. They all knew the risk. This evidence would make Victor desperate. But it was also their only chance to stop him. Ranger stepped into the open air, staring toward the road, sensing a shift in the wind. Somewhere out there, Victor surely felt the ground shifting beneath him too. The setting sun drenched the warehouse in a dull amber glow. Shadows stretching long across the cracked walls. They were gathering their findings when the slow crunch of tires on gravel reached their ears. Elias's head snapped up. "We're out of time." Ranger's body went taut, ears rigid. The front door rattled violently, metal clanging under heavy blows. Shadows clustered beyond the frame, moving through clouds of dust. Without thinking, Elias pulled Mara and Noah toward the side entrance they had used before. Boots thundered behind them, voices sharp and closing in. A dark figure lunged from the side, slamming into Elias. He fell hard, clutching at his side where a blade had torn through his coat, blood spreading quickly. "Go!" he gasped. "I'll hold them." Mara tried to pull him up, but he shoved her away. "Protect Noah. Take the evidence." Another attacker came from behind. Ranger was on him in a heartbeat, a flash of muscle and teeth. The man stumbled back, dropping the metal object he had meant to use against the boy. Mara seized Noah's hand, sprinting down a narrow hall. Ranger backed toward them, blocking every approach, his gaze never leaving the threat. They reached the side door, but a steel bar jammed its hinges. Noah spun, searching for a way out, but Ranger lunged first, ripping at the wooden frame until a gap appeared. Mara yanked the bar free, the door bursting open to a rush of cold night air. "Run!" she shouted. They bolted across the weed-choked yard, boots snagging on broken stone, the shouts and pounding footsteps closing in. Mara glanced back. Elias was still there, leaning against the wall, eyes fierce as he motioned them onward. At the forest path, Ranger veered suddenly, pulling Noah down a narrow trail thick with fallen leaves. Mara understood. It led to the riverbank where moonlight on the water could hide their tracks. They didn't stop until they reached a boulder at the edge of the shore. Hidden in its shadow, they pressed close, hearts pounding. Ranger stood guard at the entrance chest, heaving eyes glinting in the dark. Mara squeezed Noah's hand, feeling the warmth of him and the steady comfort of Ranger's fur beneath her palm. In the distance, flashlights swept across the warehouse, and angry voices echoed in the night. They had escaped. For now. But Elias was still inside, bleeding for their freedom. By dawn, after a sleepless night in a small riverside shack, the air was calm again, touched with the scent of wood smoke. Sunlight pierced the trees, laying pale gold ribbons across the damp earth. Noah sat close to Ranger, stroking his warm amber coat, worry clouding his face. At the camp stove, Mara set a kettle over the flame, her voice quiet but steady. "We need to decide our next move." Elias appeared at the doorway before they could speak further, his gait uneven, but still steady enough to move on his own. A strip of cloth bound the wound at his hip, and behind him stood a young man Mara didn't recognize, his eyes darting away nervously. Elias spoke quietly. "This is Tomas. He used to work for Victor. He wants to talk. Tomas glanced at Mara, then lowered his head, his voice trembling. I know what I did was wrong. But what I've seen, I can't stay silent anymore. Elias pulled out a chair for him, while Mara reached over to switch on the old tape recorder in the cabin. Tomas drew in a deep breath and began speaking, his tone low, but each word deliberate. Victor runs everything. That warehouse is only one of 3 holding sites. He uses hidden rooms to keep people until he sells them off. I've brought food to those tied up inside, but I never dared to free anyone. He threatened my family. Noah sat still, eyes wide, while Ranger lay near the door, his amber coat glistening in the dim light, ears twitching at every sound. Tomas went on, his voice gaining firmness. Last night I overheard Victor say he would clear out the warehouse because he suspected someone had found it. If you don't leave in time, no one will survive. Elias gave Mara a short nod, as if confirming this was the missing piece they had been searching for. Mara let the recorder run as Tomas detailed everything. How he was ordered to stand guard the moments he saw Victor meeting with buyers, the fear that had kept him silent. When his confession ended, the room fell still, the only sound the rhythmic wash of waves outside. Mara switched off the recorder and slipped it into her coat pocket, feeling the weight in her chest shift into resolve. This can be used in court. Elias frowned slightly. You're sure you want to hand it in now? That means Victor will know we're holding something that can destroy him. Mara's gaze moved to Noah. The boy still had his arms around Ranger, but his eyes shone with the same determination she had seen in him during the trial, when he stood up to defend his mother. Mara placed a hand on his shoulder. We can't wait. Every day we delay, more people will be hurt. Elias exhaled, then offered a faint smile. In that case, I'm coming with you. By noon they left the cabin in silence. Tomas kept his head down beneath a cap, walking between Elias and Mara to avoid being recognized. Ranger led the way along the narrow path toward town, each step steady, his warm golden-brown coat flecked with sable catching the muted light. The air carried the familiar scent of streets ahead, but also something sharper, like the warning edge of danger. Near the police station, Mara felt her senses heighten. Noah's hand tightened in hers. Ranger stayed close, occasionally glancing toward the dark corners along the road. They entered the building, the cold white glare of fluorescent lights stretching down an empty hallway. Lieutenant Hall, the same man who had once arrested Mara, stepped out from his office. His expression froze briefly at the sight of them. Mara took the recorder from her pocket and set it on his desk. This is a confession from someone who worked for Victor. I believe it's enough to reopen the case. Hall pressed play. As Tomas's shaky yet remorseful voice spilled from the speakers, Hall's eyes shifted. No longer suspicion, but a mix of belief and tension. I'll put this into the file right away. But be ready. Victor won't let this go. Mara nodded. The worry still lingered, but beside her was Noah, eyes bright with resolve, and Ranger standing like an unshakable wall. The sky outside had turned to dull lead, heavy with the promise of rain. At the docks, water rocked in choppy waves beneath thick, fast-moving clouds. They hadn't been away from the station long when Elias noticed the dark SUV trailing them. He's found us. Head for the docks. Elias barked, his voice tight. They moved quickly, weaving through narrow riverside streets. The engine roar behind them grew louder until Victor's face came into view in the side mirror, cold, sharp, locked on their every step. The dock stretched ahead, slick with rain from days past. Boats sat moored side by side, ropes creaking under the push of the tide. Mara pulled Noah onto a narrow wooden bridge, Ranger running beside her, muscles taut, ears forward. Victor closed in, gripping the railing as his eyes locked on Mara. "You think you can run?" he growled, stepping forward. Elias tried to block him, but a henchman shoved him hard into a post, knocking him down. Instinctively, Mara turned to help Elias, and in that moment, Victor lunged his hand, clamping on her arm. The slick boards betrayed her footing, and the next thing she felt was the icy void at her back. Noah's cry tore through the rain. "Mom!" The shock of the water knocked the air from her lungs, the cold slicing through her skin. Before she could recover, a flash of amber broke from the dock, arcing through the air. Ranger hit the water beside her eyes, bright jaw locking on the collar of her coat. Powerful kicks drove them through the current. Above wind rattled the dock waves, slapped hard against the pilings, and Noah's voice echoed down like a lifeline. Mara fought alongside Ranger, pushing through the burning in her chest, the taste of brine and diesel thick in the air. Victor started down after them, but Elias, still in pain, stood in his path, his glare forcing Victor to pause. Ranger's kicks grew stronger, churning white foam behind him. Mara felt his warmth through the water like a small flame in a storm. They reached a wooden boat tied nearby. Noah leaned over the side, voice shaking, but fierce. "Mom, grab my hand." Mara caught his hand while Ranger pushed from behind. Together they hauled themselves onto the deck, dripping, but safe. Mara collapsed, pulling Noah and Ranger into her arms, feeling the pounding heartbeats of both. Victor stood on the dock, his gaze cold as stone, but the rising wail of police sirens in the distance forced him back. He vanished into the curtain of rain. Mara lifted her head, letting the drops mix with river water on her face. Beside her, Ranger shook his coat, scattering bright beads into the gray air. The rain fell heavier, turning the dock into a blur. Wind swept in from the river, each gust slowing the world around them. They had barely stepped off the boat, searching for a way out, when a sharp cry split the storm. "Mom!" Noah's voice rang out high and urgent somewhere down the dock. Mara spun around in shock. At the far end of the wooden pier, Victor had Noah pinned tightly against his chest. One arm clamped across the boy's shoulders, the other clutching something glinting faintly in the shadows. His eyes burned with a manic light as he locked his gaze on her. "One more step, and you lose the boy," he snarled. Elias moved to block Mara, but Ranger had already stepped forward, his body half-poised, muscles drawn taut like a bowstring. Rain slicked his deep amber coat, each drop tracing the subtle tremor of restrained power. His eyes never left Victor's, unblinking, unyielding. Victor edged backward toward the pier's end, voice low and urgent. "Give me the recorder. Now." Mara slid her hand into her coat pocket, fingertips brushing the cold, damp recorder. She knew that even the smallest hesitation could put Noah in danger. But Ranger's eyes told her something else. The moment was coming. Then, a sudden gust roared through the docks, forcing Victor to shift his stance. In that split second, Ranger launched forward, an amber streak cutting through the rain. The wooden board shuddered beneath the force of his leap. The impact drove Victor back, forcing him to release Noah to block the dog's attack. Ranger's weight slammed into his chest, forepaws, pressing hard, jaws locking on the man's arm until whatever he was holding fell into the dark water below. Noah stumbled toward Mara, who caught him in a fierce embrace. Elias was there instantly, pulling them both to safety. Ahead, Ranger drove Victor toward a mooring post, his growl low and steady beneath the drumming rain. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights cut through the storm, reflecting across the water in fractured streaks. 3 armed officers stormed in, closing around Victor. At Mara's signal, Ranger stepped back, yielding the space. Victor was forced to his knees, hands cuffed behind his back. He looked at Mara and Noah one last time, no longer with cold sharpness, but with hollow defeat. "We have all we need to charge him," an officer assured. "Your family's safe now." Mara knelt to wrap her arms around Ranger, feeling the heat and quick thud of his heart beneath her palm. Noah looped his arms around the dog's neck, whispering, "Thank you, our hero." The rain kept falling, but in their hearts, it felt as if a patch of sky had opened. On the pier, amid wet boards and the sound of waves, the image of the amber-coated dog standing beside Mara and her son became a memory carved deep, a moment when loyalty had defeated the dark. Morning broke over the hills, spilling gold warmth onto rooftops still beaded with dew. The riverside town stirred awake relief, flowing through every smile and every greeting as word spread that Victor was in custody. In their small home, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with warm toast. Mara stood at the window, cup in hand, watching the river in its calm morning light. At the table, Noah colored a new drawing. Ranger standing tall on the pier with waves and police lights behind him. Every so often he glanced toward the dog lounging on the porch, ears slightly raised as if still listening to the world. Elias arrived later that morning, looking stronger, his injured shoulder neatly bandaged. "If it weren't for you two, I'd never have had the chance to put things right," he said with a smile, placing a small bag on the table. Inside, homemade food and wildflower seeds for Mara to plant by the front steps. They spoke over lunch of plans ahead. Elias would leave town for a while to recover and stay clear of Victor's remaining network. Mara wanted to return her focus to school, to restoring normalcy. Noah, with the eager spark of a boy fresh from an adventure, only looked forward to evening walks with Ranger down by the river. At the market, the air felt lighter. Vendors paused to greet them. Some came forward to thank Mara and Elias. A farmer gifted Noah a basket of red apples, while Ranger was given a bag of dog biscuits. The amber shepherd accepted his treat politely, eyes warm-tail, swaying gently. By afternoon, the sun had softened. They headed to the riverbank. The recent rains had lifted the water slightly, but now the surface was glass still, reflecting the endless blue above. They sat among the rocks, Elias telling stories of his time in Victor's company, this time with a voice free of its old weight. Noah tossed a stick into the shallows. Ranger bounded after it, sending arcs of water sparkling in the setting light. Laughter carried across the water, mingling with the murmur of waves and the rustle of leaves. They returned at sunset, golden light spilling over the narrow road into town, brushing the old walls and glowing window panes. Mara walked hand in hand with Noah, Ranger close at her side, an inseparable part of their path. That night, in the soft glow of their home, Mara wrote in her journal, "True peace isn't about forgetting what's happened, but about learning to treasure the moments we have now with those we love." On the porch, Ranger curled into himself, eyes drifting shut. His steady breathing seemed to lull the house itself, promising a night of the quiet they had long awaited. The next morning, Stillwater River wore a veil of silver mist with early sunlight scattering in golden threads. Birds sang along the banks, their songs blending with the gentle lap of water against the sand. Mara had promised herself the morning would be for Noah and Ranger alone. They followed the path to the shore. Noah ran ahead, then turned back to call the shepherd. Ranger followed, leaving neat paw prints in the damp sand, glancing back now and then to make sure Mara was near. His warm golden-brown coat shimmered in the light, every stride carrying the ease and strength of one who had weathered storms. At a wide bend in the river, Mara slowed. The sand stretched smooth before them, unmarked until now. Hand in hand with her son, she walked forward, their footprints lining up alongside Ranger's steady tracks. Noah looked up at her, voice brimming with hope. "Mom, we'll always walk together like this, right?" Mara smiled, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. She didn't answer right away, letting his words drift away with the sound of the river. A quiet promise shared between them and the water. Ranger bounded ahead, breathing in the cool, damp scent of the early morning breeze. Suddenly he stopped, ears-pricking eyes fixed on a distant spot along the sand. Mara and Noah followed his gaze. There, in the dimmer light beneath the shadow of ancient willows, a solitary figure stood still, as if quietly observing. The person wore a long dark coat, the hood pulled low to hide most of their face. Sunlight filtered through the leaves just enough to catch a few strands of hair swaying in the wind. They neither approached nor turned away, only lingered in a silence that seemed to stretch. Ranger stepped forward a few paces, keeping his distance, his warm, amber-brown eyes alert. Mara placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, signaling him to stay still. The three stood motionless, the only sounds the gentle lap of river water and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then the figure turned, walking slowly along the water's edge in the opposite direction. In the sand, fresh footprints trailed behind, stretching onward before fading as the tide crept in to erase them. "Who was that, Mom?" Noah whispered. Mara kept her gaze on the disappearing figure, a strange mix of familiarity and distance settling in her heart, like the quiet knock of a new chapter waiting to unfold. "Perhaps someone who will be part of our story, son." They moved on, leaving their own fresh trail beside the older prints. Above them, a few white clouds drifted lazily across the sky, the sunlight spilling down, as if to remind them that no matter what unknowns awaited ahead, this moment was still worth cherishing. The riverbank cradled them in its calm. Yet somewhere beyond, another journey was stirring, along with new mysteries waiting to be uncovered. The story of Mara, Noah, and Ranger closed with this peaceful image by the water's edge, yet its echoes lingered like a gentle reminder of the power of love and loyalty. Through every storm they had weathered, the warm golden-brown German shepherd had been more than a protector. He was a bridge holding their family together, inspiring an entire community with his courage and steadfast heart. German shepherds, renowned for their intelligence, loyalty, and devotion, once again proved that their true worth is not only in protecting or aiding humans, but in the quiet ways they bring comfort, trust, and hope. Ranger had shown that loving an animal means more than giving them shelter. It is about understanding them, valuing each gesture, and treasuring every shared moment. And perhaps this story carries a greater truth, that life may lead us through difficult paths. But with love, trust, and companionship beside us, every trial can be overcome. Like footprints in the sand, washed away by the tide, yet forever etched in memory, bonds and feelings endure in the heart. Somewhere out there, the journey of Mara, Noah, and Ranger might not be over at all. For wherever loyalty, bravery, and unconditional love are needed, the figure of a German shepherd will always be there, quietly writing the next chapter.